Kia ora koutou. Welcome to another preaching preparation video. This one is for Te Rātapu Te Kauwhau Ono, the 16th Sunday in Ordinary Time, and this will be for Sunday the 23rd of July. Carrying on in Paul's letter to the Roman churches, chapter 8 and verses 12 to 25. In this, Paul moves on from the hope of the resurrection to why that changes how we live now. And Paul picks up a number of different matters within this, from verses 12 onwards. One of them is our behavior with our mortal bodies. And he says that because these bodies are going to be resurrected, we shouldn't abuse them, misuse them, and so forth. Of course, that applies to other people's bodies as well. And there's a lot to reflect on perhaps around we as embodied creatures and how as Christian people we ought to value the body. I think there are a lot of parallels here to be found with Te Ao Māori and the way in which we might express respect, tapu, and so on and so forth. They're not the same, but there are some parallels there to be perhaps explored in your preaching. It's especially verses 12 through 14. There's also this wonderful section here, which I think is important to focus on, in verses 15 through 17. And this talks about our status as persons. So as human beings, in a sense, we're all children of God, and we're all in that sense, part of his family. But there's a very special way that Paul speaks here of how we can address God. And he uses these words, which you'll have come across, Abba, Father. And now, I want to caution you, first of all, by the way, Abba does not mean daddy. It's not some diminutive term. It's not a childlike term. It's an Aramaic word, Abba, and it's a very respectful, normal term for a father. It's probably more like father than dad, and it's definitely more father than daddy. So it's how you would address, it's a polite term of respectful address to somebody who's your father. So we don't have to go down this infantile idea of saying it means daddy, which I think distracts us from what Paul is really getting at here. What he's getting at is that this isn't an idea of a God, an atua, who is disconnected from us, or who is merely a power or a guardian, I guess, or kaitiaki or something like this. This is a very different idea of who God is. This is the idea that says that I am as if I'm a child and God is my father. That's an extraordinary thing to say. This isn't simply that God is in some sense my ancestor. It's talking about the relationship between a father and a child, one of care, protection, yes, respect and hierarchy and authority and so forth as well, but it's particularly picking up on this idea of a close and loving relationship, benevolent and kind. So if you think back a couple of weeks to sin as a power that is not our friend, it's not on our side, it's not on God's side. Instead, God as our Father is very much on our side. Just as I am on the side of my children, I care very deeply about how life goes for them. And this, in a sense, creates freedom for my children. They are secure in who they are. They're secure actually in who they are simply as my child. They don't have to necessarily wrestle with big questions of identity. Paul's saying in the same way, a Christian person, doesn't matter whether they're a Maori or Tongan or Pākehā, whatever it is, that person never needs to be insecure about their identity, because who they are first and foremost, they are a child of God. They are able to call God Father. They're able to say to God Matua in that respectful way. It's a respectful term, but it's also a term that says that I'm in relationship with you. E pā is another Maori phrase which reflects that. It's a more affectionate father, and again, it's still a respectful term. So you can try and think about ways to express that. It's not disrespectful, it's not infantile, but it is saying that I have an extraordinary relationship where I know that you care about my well-being, and that you are setting me free. So this is something which gives us. And I want you to give those people you're preaching to confidence about their identity as a Christian. That this is the most important thing to know as a human being, that you are God's child and that you can call God Father. Now, you may need to work with some people who might not have had a great experience of fatherhood, and so you can say this is about the ideal of fatherhood. which people only humanly experience ever partially, and for many people. But I think most people are aware there could be a good father. They've seen other good fathers. They've seen what that looks like. And so you can draw a parallel, and you can even say your own experience of fatherhood may have been, in fact, very unpleasant, but here God is a good, good father. And so all of what you might have hoped for from your own father, which you never received, instead you can have from God himself. So, this kind of thing is worth working through and just being attentive to as you preach. And then Paul goes on to talk about as well the way in which the fact of the resurrection gives us hope in the experience of suffering in the present life. So we're not supposed to misbehave with our bodies because they're going to be raised. We're also, we've given this extraordinary status as God's children. And then he says that all of this put together means that we're actually able to endure suffering, the suffering that's normal in this present life. And that's partly because actually the length of time of eternity after the resurrection is so great by comparison with this present life that the two things are not worth comparing in certain ways. He's also talking about the kind of life we're going to have. So not just its length of eternity, but I wonder if you can see that in verse 18, the glory that will be revealed in us. C.S. Lewis talks about this, that the glory of a resurrected human being would, if we saw it now, we'd be tempted to worship. So human beings are going to be restored to the status that they should have always had in the world if it wasn't for the awful power of sin coming and corrupting things. So again, I think most of us have a sense of humans ought to be something more than what we are. And that sense is true. It's like a compass needle that's pointing you towards a greater reality. Paul's saying the resurrection is where that's going to come about. So in the present, yes, we experience suffering, we experience decay of our mortal bodies. All of these things are true, but they're a small truth compared to a big truth about what it's going to be like. So again, I want you to encourage you to find ways to express that hope, that beauty, that expectation of what's going to one day come. Kia ora tātou.